Hi, everyone. Welcome to Reading for All, where we are going to work together and collaborate to make sure every child has access to opportunities to learn to read, no matter what their learning style, no matter what their ability or disability. They will learn to read. And with that being said, I have the pleasure and honor of handing this over to Debbie Meyer, who is from Decoding Dyslexia, to lead us in this forum on today's Saturday, June 25th, 2022. Take it away, Debbie Meyer.
Well, it's going to be my pleasure first to introduce Assembly Member Joanne Simon. She's here to join us. The Assembly member has hosted Dyslexia Awareness Day for many years, but more importantly, she's behind a lot of the dyslexia legislation that has been introduced to our state Senate and state assembly. And every year it makes a little more progress. And we are just thrilled to have her welcome everybody here today.
Thank you. But I can't turn off my video here. It says the host has stopped my video.
Okay, that should work now.
Still not.
Debbie, ask her to make sure she's on, I don't know if she's on the desktop, if her computer has like a camera at the top that you have to open up. Sometime that's it.
No, my camera doesn't have that, but now it's.
Oh, there you are.
It didn't turn on. I don't know why. I apologize. So thank you very much. Hello to all of you who are here today in the audience, to our other panelists and the coordinators, to Dr. Cody and Debbie Meyer and Dolores Connors. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to hearing more from you today. So I wanted to welcome everybody to this session. As Debbie said, we have been working on dyslexia in the New York State legislature now for a number of years. One of the first things I did was start talking about dyslexia because nobody had been talking about it. And we did the first Dyslexia Awareness Day in 2016. And it has grown and it gets more and more attendance every year. And we have more and more legislators who are interested in the issue, whether it's a personal issue to them or otherwise, who are really listening now with a different ear. And I think a lot of that is because we have empowered parents and young people to knock on those doors, to talk to their state legislator, to talk about how important it is to get behind the dyslexia legislation. A few years ago, we passed a bill that requires that schools use the word dyslexia or dysgraphia or whatever the learning disability term is when they go about making plans for a child's special education. And for too many years, we were told that you couldn't do that. But in fact, you can and you should, and it's now a matter of state law as well as federal law. So that's an important step in the right direction. And now we are having a dyslexia task force. And we also always come back to this issue about whether our teachers are trained to teach reading according to the science of reading, which is how children learn to read, whether they have dyslexia or whether they just need instruction in reading. And so we are working on that as well. I have a bill to do that, but also I'm working with the higher education community because as we know, you can pass a law, doesn't mean people implement it. So we need to take coming at this from all fronts. And that's where all of you come in because you are part of the mix. You are part of the people who will be calling for better legislation, calling for better practices in our schools and a better recognition of what it is that we need to do so that all our children can read. Because we all know that if our children are learning to read, we can really end or at least very dramatically shrink that school to prison pipeline. And that's what we're here about. So I want to thank all of you for your attention. And I'm going to be listening closely to what Debbie and Dolores are saying and looking forward very much to hearing from everyone and Sean as well. And Dr. Beckles, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to hear the rest of this conversation. And I hope you all enjoy it and learn a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanne. We're going to go through this presentation, and I'm going to be both talking and kind of managing the webinar. So please excuse me if I have little mishaps here. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I always start with this slide, and I'm sure Joanne recognizes it. It's from Dyslexia Awareness Day in 2020. It was the last one in Albany. The kid on with the blonde hair is my kid. His story started really at the end of first grade when he was invited to come to a professional development session for a week after school got out. Well, it turned out to be a professional development session on reading, but they were teaching the teachers how to use one of the systems that does not work for dyslexic kids. Then we worked towards getting an IEP. He was never even offered RTI. He was never offered AIS. They went straight to the IEP. Also turned out the school, one of the progressive public schools in Harlem, didn't have any teachers trained to teach reading, much less teach reading to a dyslexic kid. And so that IEP didn't help either. We ended up going outside the school system to get our neuropsych. We went outside the school system to go to Camp Dunnebeck to get them started on the road to reading. And then we went outside the school system to go to the Windward School for Dyslexic Kids. Things really turned around from him, and we'll talk about his story again towards the end of this session. But this is what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about why we're here. We're going to hear some stories from some panelists about being dyslexic and being the parent of dyslexic kids. We're going to recap a little bit of what we did at our first session, especially what educators can do, but also what parents can do. We're going to really talk more about what Joanne started talking about, what the village can do. And then we'll talk about really changing this dyslexia label from a stigma to a power label. And we're going to do this in many different ways. We'll talk to you, but Dolores, can you tell them what else we're going to be doing?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dolores Connors, and as you saw, I am a reading specialist, a proud public school educator for the past 29 years. And I come to this gathering, this meeting, this collection to be a part of the conversation, to share some ideas and some thoughts, but also to listen and also to be guided by what you have to bring to this piece. So we're going to be doing a lot. And I will say to you that this is an interactive session. So if you have a piece of paper nearby and a pen, you may want to pull it a little close because you want to take notes. You may have some questions as we go along the way. And at any point when we stop for questions, please feel free to participate. So this is a really, really interactive session. And one thing I will say, I shared a little bit about who I am, and I can see that you're on the screen, and I don't know much about you, but I do know that you do care about literacy. You showed up today to give your time and your attention to a cause and to be very active about that. So I am forever grateful that you are here. I'm happy that we're having this conversation, and I'm really excited to move forward.
Thank you. Well, we always try to frame this why we're here first. Can you take us through this slide?
Yeah, so let's take a look at this data that we're looking at. And here we can see, and this is from the New York Urban League from a report done in 2019, and we can see that students from 3rd to 8th grade, how they're performing. Right, overall, how students are performing. But looking closely at this graph, we can clearly see that Black students are performing below and well below the white students, right? And those are indicated in factors. And let's just take a step back and let's think about what we're looking at. So this is a text. This is a text feature that allows us to read a lot of information without having to do a lot of reading. There is a report that supports this, but we didn't have to go through the entire report. We could look at this graphic feature and get some understanding and have some knowledge. So I say that to you to remind our upper level, middle school, high school level students, that when they see these graphic features in their textbooks, that they are to depend on them to learn something. So I wanted to point that out. But now let's take a look at what this is and how and why it's there. So historically, we know we're talking about 1883 slave law acts that are prohibiting free Black as well as enslaved Black people to be able to read, right? So we could go back historically to know that we're not all starting off at the same place. And that's a past practice, that's a historic practice. But then we have right now, current, present injustices in what resources are provided for students of color. And that's a problem. And that's why we're here today. So as we take a look at this graph, and we know historically how this could be, right? What we're looking at, but we also know presently what brought us here, but we're here for the future. So as we look at this, we're motivated to do something about this. So I wanted to say that, and I also wanted to say, let's clearly, this is a big issue. It's not just an issue for just one group of people. You're talking about 60% of students not being able to read proficiently. Students, right? So this is everybody's call. We all should be on this. We're all jumping in on this one because this is a huge problem. But clearly, we can see the discrepancy. We can see the difference in our Black and brown children compared to white. So this graph is very telling. So thank you for sharing. Putting that
Thank you. You know, and I really think the dyslexic students are the canaries in the coal mine, calling for better literacy instruction for everybody. I'm going to show a second graph. You know, we said in our last session that test scores don't show the whole story. And this is true. This graph, though, is also based on test scores, just like the last one. And it shows that preschool isn't even very effective in helping kids learn to read. That's because our preschool teachers are not always prepared in their preparation programs, in their undergraduate programs, in their non-degree programs that they need to use to get into preschool on the basics of language, the things that people need to get to reading, not even how to teach reading, but how to share the basics of language. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on. But when you see this graph about going to preschool and seeing that preschool isn't helping, we realize that it's really coming down to our systems before the teachers are teachers. You know, there are costs besides test scores to there's things that indicate our poor reading instruction besides test scores. We see the costs in remediation in upper elementary and in middle school and high school. We see the costs, and they're very human costs. When we see the literacy rates among the homeless and among the incarcerated, we see all these costs, and they are all a result of this poor teacher preparation programs that we have.
Yeah.
There's some real paradoxes and consequences. Dolores, can you share these?
Yeah, sure. So we all know, study after study, that reading instruction works well in our early ages, right? We're familiar and we're comfortable with that. But what happens when that's not enough, right? So when that's not enough, and your child is in an upper elementary school or middle school or high school, and then you're invited to a child study team meeting, a 504 meeting or an IEP meeting, you're invited to listen to what? Acronyms about what a school is going to do. So a teacher, guidance counselor, whoever, they're going to present, oh, we're working with your child through RTI, MTSS, and you're sitting there as a parent nodding, right? Because all you know is that you want to hear that your child is being supported. However, the acknowledgement or understanding of what these things stand for is not very clear to you as a parent. So all you know is you're buying into, you said you're going to help, I believe you. But let's just break this down for a second. So RTI is response to teaching intervention, reading intervention, right? So in that system is a tiered support program. So when we say RTI, we're providing students with a tiered support. So there's an indicator that says that your child needs help and the teacher is aware of that, right? And then from there, the next tier is they're gonna collect some data on your child to see how your child is doing. And then the next tier with that is they start to implement working with your child, right? So MTS, similar to RTI, right? We're talking about multi-sensory tiered sensory support system. Again, you have that tiered support system, but this one is going to come with a little bit of emotional support to help your student. And it's great, right? It's an initiative. It's a push forward for a school, and that's fantastic. But if we go back to that very first graph, when we were taking a look at those large numbers, when we're talking RTI or MTSS, we're only talking about a small percentage of students that are going to receive those benefits, that are going to receive that support. So then you have to ask yourself the question, why would a school hold off on that, knowing what they know? Right? Why would a school just not fully go into supporting all these students if they're receiving data after data to show that students need the report? Now, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, right? But I do think about, in some ways, I'll just say how New York City may present schools, right? So if your school has a report card that shows where they're standing, do you really want to send your child to the school that's showing that they're struggling with reading? They have struggling readers. As a parent, you're making decisions based off of charter or public. You want to send your school to the best school, right? And for you, that means or can sound like, let me send the school that's doing fantastic and well. So maybe the data is something that a school will hold on to. Maybe the data for themselves, a school will look at and say, do I really want a large number of special education students in my database? So let's put in some programs to see if we can address these issues so we don't have to touch that, right? I don't have the answer to it, but it does lead us to ask these questions, right? And then a parent, what are they gonna do? They're gonna look for outside support. That Saturday support program that's offered, that tutoring session that some parents have to pay for and can be quite expensive, right? They're going to do that, but without communication, it can complicate things, right? So if you have your support, your tutor working on whole language and your teacher's working on phonics, if that child is not able to merge those two practices, then you may have a bit of a conflict or may not see the growth that you're looking for. So communication is key. And I know that word complicated is in there, and it doesn't mean don't do it. Any help is help. So if somebody's offering to help, jump in. But I'm just saying the communication is really, really important. And as we take a look at this last bullet here, right, just read the last bullet to yourself, right? Because this is where this conversation gets a little sensitive. This is where this conversation gets a little deep, right? Because for no reason should any child be penalized for not being able to read. And what does that look like? So you do not get art, or you do not get music, or you don't go on a field trip because maybe during our reading group time, you were doodling instead of answering the question. Or maybe your response wasn't as swift as I wanted it to be. So now I'm going to say you're not participating well. When the child is sitting there struggling, when we get to this last bullet, then we really, and we do, have an issue. But I'm glad we're all here today because we're all here to figure this out. So yeah, well, we can keep going.
All right, this is a slide many people have already seen, but I put it in again because it's so important. You know, there's a real Matthew effect, and Dolores actually just explained it. In the Bible, we say the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. In reading, if you can read and you read a lot, you learn a lot more. If you struggle to read and you don't read, you learn less. And then that just feeds on itself. But, you know, these stats are why I'm here. There is a real dyslexia to prison pipeline. So the school to prison pipeline actually starts in that kindergarten and first grade literacy instruction. And that's a real place where we can actually change things. You know, literacy, as we go on, is a determinant of health and mental health and public health. It's clearly a determinant of your economic security and our community's workforce development. It's also a determinant of our democracy. We're going to go into our first poll now.
Yeah.
And hopefully I can pull it up.
Yeah, you're good. So let's take a look at doing our own collective data, our own personal data. So I'm going to ask you these questions. And as I ask the questions, just think about it. Think about it. But I'm asking you to think about the 3 closest people to you, not big, all the whole wide world, even though we all are community, but think about the people that are closest to you. So the first bullet, do you know anybody that never goes to the library or bookstore? You know, anybody like that? Do you know anybody that only looks at headlines in newspapers or pictures in a magazine? Think about that. Do you know people that can read, don't really enjoy it, and really can't spell? And then the last box is everybody in your community reads for enjoyment and information. However, you checked off those boxes, whatever you checked off, we are glad that you're here. We are glad that you're here because if you're in need of support, we are hoping it is our greatest intent by the end of this presentation that you walk away with something that you can use. And if you checked off the last box proudly and boldly, then we are glad that you're here for your advocacy because we're dependent on you to step out and speak for someone else who cannot speak for themselves. So however you check this poll today, whatever your graph looks like for you, wonderful. And we're happy that you're here.
All right, so I finally pulled up the actual Zoom poll if anyone wants to fill it in. It's of course anonymous. And I don't think our panelists can fill it in because they're all made hosts and I don't think hosts can fill this in. I'm gonna turn it off. We're gonna move over to the next part of our session. You know, in our last session, we talked about a lot about what dyslexia was and how our dyslexic students learn to read and what the signs and symptoms are of dyslexia. And we can talk about that more. But today we're going to hear from some dyslexic students and from some parents of dyslexic students so we can understand what's going on and what their true experience is. So first up is Sean Johnson.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Sean.
My name is Sean Johnson.
Stop sharing. Sean, can you tell us a little bit about your earliest reading experiences?
Ooh. So my earliest reading experiences, one, in my household, reading was an everyday thing. Like, so I grew up in 2 households. So I grew up in a household with my dad and my mom. So in both houses, in my mom's household, reading was an everyday thing. We had a bookshelf in our house since I was like 5 years old. My mom would read me books to go to sleep every night. So it was something that was always on my mind, but I could never do it myself. And I found that out at a very young age. And spelling also was very hard, which I found out in my dad's house from a very young age. So in my dad's house, we would have like spelling bees from a very young age. So I was like 5 years old, like 6 years old. And my sister would always like get on me for spelling, but she didn't know I had dyslexia at the time because I didn't even know I had dyslexia at the time. But it was something that it would cause anxiety, a lot of anxiety from a very young age. And it was something that I didn't approach until I got to 4th grade. So I had to live with it without knowing. Well, I knew, but I couldn't do anything about it because I didn't learn how to read until 4th grade. And it was a hard experience growing up with having dyslexia because some of the things that normal kids would do, like normal kids would go traveling by themselves around like 8 years old, 10 years old, and things like that. Or kids would go to the store for people and picking up like simple things in the store. If I didn't memorize what specific object it was, but they told me like go to the store and get like something I never got before, like a bag of chips or something like that that was rare that was in the store, I wouldn't know what it was because I couldn't read at the time. So things like that, the simple things that I didn't think about, that when I look back, I didn't do as a child because it affected me and my dyslexia. But as I got older, I started to realize that my dyslexia was actually a benefit to me because I was good at other things. So like science and math, I was really good at art. Those topics I'm really good at as a side effect. So it didn't really affect me as much as it shunned me as a child, but it definitely affected my day-to-day basis, like as a child, interacting with other kids of my age. So
Your mom told me that she actually found a good dyslexia tutor through Boys Harbor after school program.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
My tutor, Pam, I love Pam to this day. So I don't know the name of the program. My mom probably knows the name of the program, but in 4th grade, I was introduced to my tutor, Pam, who taught me how to read. It was an agonizing process she got through, but till to this day, some of the methods that she taught me, I still use. I find myself using because it's like in college, when I had to write 20-page papers and I had to read 250 pages because I was a political science major, because I wanted to be a lawyer. And doing those things, I had to incorporate some of the methods. So I actually tried to teach my younger brother some of the methods of reading, which he actually learned in the program that he's in right now. I forget the Dunbeck program, if I'm not mistaken. He goes over the summer and they teach him some of the methods that I've actually taught. I was taught too. And those methods are really good in regards to retaining information. I feel like in school, they don't give you information that you retain and you hold on to. Where Pam, she taught me the simple things like teaching me the alphabet every day. She would come in and repeat the alphabet to me every day. And that made comprehension a whole lot easier. And from the comprehension becoming a whole lot easier, reading became a whole lot easier. And as a child, that the repetitiveness of it sunk in rather than, and like I can, like basically what I'm saying is I can see the difference from learning in school and learning with Pam. Learning with Pam was more individualized, and that helped me excel because before that period in school, I had to memorize everything. And when if you understand the school program in New York City, when you get to 3rd grade, you have to take a test. All the kids had to take a test. I was terrified of that test. I started crying. I actually asked my mom, I remember one day I asked my mom, could I stay home from school? And I explained I had a test. I didn't want to take the test. I was scared of taking the test. And that in itself, once I got to Pam and I started to learn how to read, my grades, like going to school wasn't agonizing anymore. It wasn't an experience of getting bullied in school for not wanting to read out loud and things like that. Because at the time I was in middle school. So I just got to middle school when I was in 4th grade, when I was teaching with Pam. And I remember I had a math teacher who taught us French. And something that Pam always told me was that learning another language was going to be extremely hard because of my dyslexia. So even if I wanted to learn another language, I would be able to learn it, but it was like crossing another bridge as I'm already crossing a bridge that I'm on. And so I'm always going to remember the day I explained to my teacher in class, I'm going to try to learn some of the methods that you're teaching me, but I know I'm not going to retain the information. And I explained that to the teacher. And thank God that Pam also knew French. So she helped me with my homework. So it's like small things that I always remember about my dyslexia that as a child, I didn't think about like how blessed I was. Like having Pam, and like if I honestly can say if I didn't have Pam and I didn't learn how to read in 4th grade, I would have never graduated college in 4 years. I would have never got into Xavier. Like, and the crazy thing is, once I got older, oh, sorry about that. Once I got older, I actually, I remember on the program, you saw that there are a lot of individuals who have dyslexia. I've actually come in contact with 2 people throughout my life that didn't even know they had dyslexia until I told them, maybe you have dyslexia, because I noticed some of the patterns that they did when they were reading, that you said in those 4 questions. I noticed those patterns. And like one of my ex-girlfriends, she actually had dyslexia and she didn't know until she got to high school. And she didn't have an IEP or anything. And that in itself helped her later on, because she wound up getting an IEP later on and getting extra time in college, which you need. I feel like certain individuals need because of the tests, because of the anxiety that you have. And there's a lot to unpack.
There is so much to unpack. I think every dyslexic kid remembers the name of that tutor or teacher that unlocked English for them.
Yes.
So the way your face lit up when you started talking about Pam, I've seen that so many times. And Dolores is one of those people that unlocks the language for people. But Dolores, do you have some questions for Sean's little brother, Dylan?
Yeah, so hi Dylan, how are you?
Good.
Good, nice to see you. So Dylan, I hear that you're going to be participating in something that's pretty fun and cool. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Little camp fun. Yeah.
Get down and back. It's
Okay.
very fun because it's like you're Adele and you go places on the weekends, but on the weeks it's like you have school, but you're just doing different activities. Like one of my schedules were I had tutoring, then I had gym, I had mountain biking. Then after that, we would go back to our dorms, go to bed, do it again. But on the weekends, we would go like in the forest hiking. And I remember this one time, the first time I met my tutor, I was confused because I thought I was gonna like see her online in like my dorm room, but when I met her, I was very excited because I wanted to read because all my friends, they started reading at like in kindergarten and stuff. So I felt like I was left out because I didn't know how to read. But when I went to Camp Databack, I learned how to read and it was fun because I got to read very cool books.
Wow, that is fantastic. So you're having fun and you're learning, and that's wonderful. That is fantastic. So keep it up, enjoy, and yeah, I'd love to hear more about your adventures, definitely. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dylan. Thank you.
So now, before we wrap up this session, can you just tell us a little bit about being the parent of, I think it's 3 dyslexic children?
Dyslexic. So for me, as my son said, I'm an avid reader. Learning came very easy for me. So I was very blessed at a very young age to learn to read early, love books, introduce my children to books. And so because learning came easy for me, I really never understood what having developmental variation was until I had children. And so I do have a younger sister who's dyslexic, and she always struggled, but I never understood it. And my mother really dealt with it. So for me, being a parent, it was like a new world opened up to me. I often use analogy of being on 2 different islands. And I always read to my kids and tried to teach them to read. And so with Sean, I often felt like he was on one island, I was on the other, and I couldn't figure out a bridge to get us across to one another. And for several years, I struggled with just trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And it wasn't until one day I went to my mom because I was so frustrated with him not being able to read. He was in 3rd grade and the tests and the pressures. And my mother then said, oh, you know, your sister's dyslexic. So I said, what is that? And when I began, because I love to read, I research everything. I spent so much time reading about dyslexia. And it was like a light bulb went off, because everything they said about dyslexia was my experience with my son. And as a result of his dyslexia in first and second and third grade, he was very depressed. He would oftentimes have outbursts, tantrums, very much had an IEP and was labeled to have a social worker to see, to have speech therapy, but nothing the school was doing was really helping. The blessed thing was he went to a progressive public school, and the principal there was very open to allowing, you know, his issues to get whatever support. If I could figure out something or he could figure out something, we kind of work together. And I understood that that was rare, because in most public schools, that was not the experience. And because I have Black boys who are really tall and big and look older than they are, oftentimes the expectation was that he should be doing things that he wasn't. And I felt inadequate as a parent. And so for me, the struggle was, I also was a young mother. I was a teenage mom when I had my first son, and I was in my early 20s. So I was also trying to navigate this parenting thing, and the stigma around having a kid who's disrupting class, right? Not necessarily because he's a bad kid, but because he can't read. So when it's read aloud and the teacher's trying to force him to read and he's having outbursts, I'm called in. And oftentimes he was demonized about his behavior. And then I have a 34-year-old son who I adopted at 13, who had a severe case of dyslexia. He learned to read at 17. But he too used to memorize the street signs, used to count the blocks to be able to travel on his own. But what I will say about having that was, when I did find this program at Boys Harbor, being a mom, I had to work 2 jobs just to pay for tutoring for him, because I desperately loved reading and wanted my son to read. But once he learned to read, he was on the honor roll throughout middle school and high school. He went on to go to Fordham University on a full ride and graduate in 3.5 years because of what Pam did for him. But for 5 years of the tutoring, $90 an hour, committing to 3 hours a week, working 2 or 3 jobs, it was expensive. Like Mr. Laura said, because I was a person who loved education and valued it, I invested in it. But that's not the story for a lot of my friends who had children with similar issues. And even within my family, you know, I have 2 nephews who are in prison, and one who was dyslexic, never learned to read. And so the story could be very different. And so I found that getting the resources early made the difference. And the stigma, because the first thing as a Black mom, when someone tells your child needs an IEP, you're like, I don't want him to be stigmatized. He already has enough to deal with. But because I'm an educator and a person who valued education, and my mother valued it, I was open to hearing what an IEP was. And I had to navigate that terrain, which can be very costly, very traumatic. And for me, the bigger issue of why I'm in the fight for other families of color to understand it is because I know when you give a child what they need, you can change the trajectory. I look within my family, my ability to fight for my sons and get them and work 2 and 3 jobs just to get them to tutoring so they could read made a difference. I don't have children in prison. I don't have children who are struggling to find their way in the world. Where my sister, who chose a different path, who chose not to accept her child's learning variation and struggle. You know, my nephew went to prison. Maybe their lives would have been different. You know, we fought for years in our family to try to get her to get the help. And at times she got it, but what they needed, she couldn't afford. And so I think education is a right, and it should be a part of public school education, and all kids should have it. What my kids learned was not in a public school building. I had to seek out outside, similar to Debbie, and be willing to take a chance with people I didn't know, with people that didn't look like me, and then trust that they would help me navigate that. Because for me, it was a very hard thing. When learning comes easy to you, to watch your child struggle, it is the most crucifying thing in your spirit. And that for me, I think, is one of the reasons why I stay in the fight to help other children, because reading can change the trajectory of a life, especially if you grew up in poverty and you're poor. Educating your mind just to live better, to eat better, reading gives you that. And so when you don't have it, it puts you in a deficit in the world. And so my hope is that now that we have people that are interested in it, that more children will have an opportunity. Camp Dunnebeck is beautiful, but it's $13,000 for 6 weeks. I am blessed to be able to work to can afford part of that and fight the system to help pay for it. But there's so many Black and Latino mothers like me who will not have access to that. And so we have to figure out how to make a Camp Dunnebeck come to the urban communities of Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and that Arthur Gillihan learning, so that all kids can have an opportunity and not just people like myself who are in position and power and position as a result of me being educated.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad you're in this fight with us. I'm going to go back to our presentation, but I want to remind everyone to put questions in the chat. You can use the Q&A. I'm going to check both. So, and I think you can raise your hand too. I can put you on the screen. But so what's next? We're going to go through a little simulation and then continue on our agenda. But let me check the chat. I don't see any questions yet. So why don't we move on? And I'm wondering, anyone be able to read this? When you look at it, a lot of people think it's natural to be able to read. It's not natural. If it was natural, you could stare at this for a while with no lessons at all and eventually read it. But I'm sure there might be someone, maybe they're in Brooklyn Beach right now, and Brighton Beach, they might be able to read this. And do the pictures help? Pictures don't always help you learn to read. So now this is transliterated. I'm going to put the pictures up, and I bet if you stared at it long enough, you might recognize a couple things. You might recognize this word because it looks a lot like the English word. You might recognize this one, but you probably don't know which one is bus driver and which one is bus. So now I've got the English version, and I bet you can read it just fine. But that's because you learned how to read. Most dyslexia presentations and most literacy presentations use nonsense words. But you see, it works with foreign languages too. It works with the nonsense words of transliterated language. Reading is just not natural. And why isn't it natural? I'm going to go through a quick history of English. I took a whole semester learning this. English started out as an Old English German language. But remember, the Romans conquered England. They came through. And a lot of Latin words were dropped into the English language because of the Romans that came through. The Vikings came through England. And a lot of sort of Danish-ish words were dropped into the English language. Then the Normans came through. That's French. And a lot of French words were dropped into the English language. And we ended up with Middle English. You might remember Beowulf. I think that's Middle English. And then transportation got better. Roads were built and things, and the Irish and the Scottish and the Welsh could move around a little bit more. And those languages dropped words into English. Words from Greek, science, and art became global and got dropped into English. And we ended up with what really started becoming modern English. And the scribes were the people that were supposed to codify how we spell it. But the scribes didn't come to a convention once a year and make decisions. They wrote letters back and forth. The letters got lost in the mail. They argued about things like, should 2 and 12 and twin and 20 all start with TW? And it was basically decided yes, but the pronunciation of the number 2 is not twu. We say 2. It's kind of hard to get our mouth around twu, but we can do it with twin and 20. And then the printing press came along, really codified how things were spelled. But then Daniel Webster in the Americas changed that even a bit more. And we are still going through something called the Great Vowel Shift. And there's a podcast that I can share with you later that explains this better than I can. But the words food and good and blood used to rhyme. And that's because they just used to rhyme. And that's why they're all spelled with that double O. But as different words come before and after words, the vowels inside your mouth travel around because your mouth is in a slightly different position. And they ended up not rhyming. We have the in good and the in food and the sound of blood. They're all spelled the same, but they do not rhyme anymore. Yet, to be able to teach this, you have to know some basic codes of the English language. But often, teachers are giving kids strategies that depend on those codes, but they haven't taught the codes. So can you tell us about these strategies, Dolores?
Yeah, so we heard from numerous examples in just our earlier presentation that teachers are going into teaching with very limited instruction on how to teach reading, right? But they know that they're responsible for it. So what you will hear in the early elementary school is what you're looking at with this chart right here. So you're going to hear a hunt for those sight words. And if you can remember that sight word list that comes out in the beginning of the week in the early elementary school, kindergarten, first and second grade, you're familiar with that. Look at the pictures. Get your lips ready. So that's something that a teacher would say, do the letter sounds match, stretch out the word, look for phonics chunks, skip the word and reread, flip the vowel sound, try a word that makes sense, right? So these are all strategies that a teacher with very limited reading instruction has with her as a tool, right? But if a child does not know how to explicitly apply those strategies, then they don't mean very much. And what does a child do? They will ask for help. The little ones will ask for help. The big ones will not. The big ones will start to doodle. The big ones will put their head down. The big ones may slouch. The big ones may turn and make a joke, right? Looking for a bit of relief in that classroom because they don't understand how to apply those strategies. Why? Because the teacher hasn't explicitly taught them, right? So they are aware that this is important, but without explicit instruction, we may end up with a situation, a problem. So yeah, teachers know, but they don't know what they don't know. And this is why, pushing to have the university support instruction for reading as part of what is a requirement to be a part of a program is really key and important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So there's another reason our current instruction is failing, and that's leveled books. This is a quote from my friend Katie that she gave at the literacy conference that the DOE put on last fall. And, really, these guided books, leveled readers are scarlet letters. Kids run around and they know that so-and-so is only on P and another person's on F and someone else is on Z. Kids know. And that's just not fair to the kids that are struggling. Also, these books, don't have any system to them. And kids are promoted often for memorizing books, not for really reading the books. So those leveled books don't work either. We don't want the kids to be carrying out a scarlet letter, carrying around that scarlet letter of a book level. So we're going to go into another simulation now. I hope you have a pen and pencil. Can you write down, please, 5 words? Cough, like you have a cold. Rough, like sandpaper. Through, like you go through a tunnel. Though, like the preposition or nevertheless, though. And plow, and there's 2 ways to spell plow. And I want you to look at these words and say them out loud. Cough, rough, through, though, and plow. Do they rhyme? But do they look like they should rhyme? They have 5 different sounds. They're 5 different words with that same spelling pattern, O-U-G-H. They have 5 different sounds. All right, now can you please take your pen or pencil and put it in your wrong hand. If you're right-handed, put it in your left hand. If you're left-handed, put it in your right hand. And please write bologna like the sandwich meat. You can sing the song if that helps you read it. Some of you are old enough to remember that jingle. And then write pony like a small horse. Now, what was different about those words, about writing those words? Did it feel, Sean, did you do the exercise?
Sorry
Sean,
about
did you do
that.
the exercise?
Yeah. Did you say do it with my left hand, right?
Yeah.
I'm writing. I couldn't even write the word with my left hand. Like,
They're very hard. And when you're using your wrong hand, you're thinking about every single letter and how to form it.
yes.
And that's what early writers and early readers are doing, and dyslexic readers are also doing. So, if you think about that and how early, it's not a natural thing, even with your good hand. If you don't know which letters come next, you have to stop and think about it. Now I've got another poll. Hopefully I'll be able to pull this up. How many ways can you spell the long A sound? I think there's 3 ways to spell a long A. 4. Maybe there's 6 ways to spell long A. Maybe there's 9. I wonder if our poll is working because no one's participating. Oh, there we go. Ooh, I think there's some good teachers here. Anyone else want to participate? All right, I'm going to show you something. There are 12 ways to spell long A. If that's not confusing for a kid, I don't know what is. But it gets more confusing because we have homophones. All right, I'm going to ask you to write another list down. It's just 4 letters, lowercase letters. I want you to write lowercase b, lowercase d, lowercase p, and lowercase q. Now, these are the letters people say get reversed. But really, when scientists look at it, children are guessing at these letters. They're guessing, are they the ball and stick letter? And it's very confusing because they look so much alike. S and Z in an early handwriting often look a lot alike because they're just mirror images. M and W are mirror images. These are the letters that get reversed, but they're not reversed, they're guessed. Because when the B is flipped upside down, it's a D, it makes a completely different sound. But when it's flipped around, when you flip around a chair, it's still a chair. If you flip it upside down, you get a P. If you flip a chair upside down, you still have a chair. You flip it around, you get a Q. This is what's confusing. And so we have to simplify it. Dolores is going to take us through ways to simplify it, but basically we teach common ways first and then more complicated ways afterwards. So you might teach that a consonant E makes a long A sound. You might teach that AI comes at the beginning or middle of a word and AY comes at the end of a word. But you might not teach how to spell the number 8 until you're also teaching freight and weight. So we're going to go through a chart that's almost as fun as that Beanie Babies chart that actually talks about how you learn to read and spell.
So, okay, so this is what I'm going to ask you to do right now. So I'm going to ask you to say your name, your first name, to yourself. Right? I'm going to say my name out loud, but I want you to say your name. So my name is Dolores. Right, that's my name, Dolores. Last name, Connors. So just say your name to yourself. Now, here's the thing about what I just did. When I was saying my name, what I was doing was breaking my name down into syllables, right? Breaking my name into syllables, into a sound and a break, a sound and a break. And if there is anything, well, hope you leave with a lot today, but if there is something that you can walk away with today to apply, it is this, that every single word in the English language is made up of syllables. And what does that mean? That means that there's a sound and a break for every single word. And I don't care what elementary school you went to in New York City, and even I know that this is true for today too. Every elementary school is telling you all of your vowel sounds. They're telling you the vowels. Everyone can repeat A, E, I, O, U, sometimes Y, right? We all know that. And why is that so important to know? Because within every syllable, there has to be a vowel. So when you say your name to yourself again, as you were making up those breaks, you could see where that vowel is, right? And so for some words, as in Sean, right, it's gonna be one syllable, right? Or as in Joanne, we have 2 syllables. But as we break up that word, any word, there has to be a vowel. So what does that breakup of syllables look like? So you can have a closed syllable, and who doesn't want to look at candy? So this is fun, right? So you can have that closed syllable. So we have Kit Kat. You have the vowel closed out by the consonant closes it out, and then the vowel sound is short. Then you have Rolo. They're pretty good too, right? You have 2 syllables there. You have a vowel, you're closing out that syllable with the vowel, so the vowel is going to be long. Low, closing out the syllable with the vowel is going to be long. And then Debbie had just mentioned the vowel consonant E, right? So we have I-K-E. The I is going to be long, you're closing it out with the K sound, and the E is silent. And that works for bake, it works for size, it's the rule. And then in some situations, we have the vowel T, right? So for names, or for words, let's take Reese's, you have 2 vowels coming together to make a long vowel sound or a unique vowel sound. And as a reader, when I recognize and I see these 2 vowels together, I know what to do. So I'm familiar with what practice I should use in breaking up that syllable. And then, and this is my opinion, that R is the most powerful letter in our alphabet. Why? Because R will change the sound of a vowel. And if you are listening to this and you are in Boston, you're like, what are you talking about? We know how to pronounce A-R. Yeah. But for the rest of us, A-R, E-R, R is a controlled U-R. R is a controlled vowel, and it will change the sound of the vowel. Think of the word car. Everybody else except for Boston, we will say straight to car, no AR, but they can do it. So if you ever meet anyone from Boston, ask them to say the word car and you will hear something different. But for the rest of us, it's a controlled consonant. And then when we have L-E, right? So that L-E is really powerful, not only for reading, but for writing. So if I'm writing the word bubble or Skittles, right? Skittle, I'm not going to close it out with that L. I know the power that E needs to be there to make that vowel sound. Right? So when I recognize these patterns, when I come across an unfamiliar word, a word that I've never seen before, we're talking about, for me, middle school, high school, level students, right? You're talking about multisyllabic words that you don't know, breaking that word up into syllables and understanding how to break up that word becomes a very powerful tool. So these 6 syllable types are really important for us to know as readers. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say on that.
Thank you. This is a chart that really helped define the science of reading and helped us really it's supposed to help teachers understand how to teach reading. So first we're going to talk about the bottom part, and it kind of builds on what Dolores was just talking about.
Right, so this word recognition, being able to recognize a word and be able to read it, right? Phonologically, being able to pronounce that word, being able to decode it, to say it, and being able to have that sight recognition. When you have that, then you're able to take a look at a text and go through it, right? If you're scrambling and struggling with being able to do those things, then comprehension is so far away from you, right? So being able to have these words, recognize how to break them down and understand it is very powerful, a very powerful piece in being able to read.
Thank you. So the last event, we talked a lot about dyslexia, and that's almost always where the kids are struggling, on the bottom part of the rope. But the rope is only as strong as its weakest part. If a strand is weak, the rope is weak. We also have this top part of the rope, and this is where parents can do a lot of help. It's all about language comprehension. The things we do in language, it's reading aloud to help build background knowledge, is going to museums to help build background knowledge, vocabulary, the structures of your language, just semantics that you're using, the types of sentences that you use, how complex they are. Really inferencing and understanding what a story is, if it's got foreshadowing, those kind of things about language. So together, all these things lead to fluent execution, but you don't stop there. You have to practice your fluency because that builds comprehension. Can you talk a little bit about fluency?
Yeah, so this is a sweet space, right? Being able to read, we're talking about accuracy, reading with few errors, right? We're talking about a reading speed, right? So we don't want to read too slow where we're bored from the text, or too fast where we're not keeping up and don't know what's happening. And then our prosody, the skill of reading with the proper notation and phrasing and expression, right? This is the sweet space. And where does this happen? Where can we apply this immediately to practice this strategy? In a picture book, right? In the picture book where the sentences are pretty simple, right? But they're dependent on us to be accurate, right? The reading speed of as we're reading to our child next to us is important. We don't want them bored looking away. We want to make sure that our speeding rate is accurate so that they can follow us. And then most important with beautiful picture books, the illustrations, but illustrators and authors, what are they doing? They're putting in punctuation of exclamation points, of question marks, right? Those are all in a picture book. So through a picture book piece, we get to practice fluency. And let's not forget the theme of a picture book. When we're reading a picture book, it's for all of us, right? The themes in a picture book are deep for adults too, right? So it's a benefit, it's a win-win, and we get to practice this fluency system.
So I'm going to give a couple examples of prosody. If you don't pause at the comma in "let's eat, Grandma," you're no longer inviting Grandma to eat dinner with you. It sounds like "let's eat, Grandma." You're trying to eat Grandma. My other example that I always use is Joanne has the insight not to incite a riot. Now, if you didn't have the prosody in that sentence, there is no comprehension for it. It doesn't make any sense without the prosody there. So prosody builds comprehension. So we're still taking questions. I haven't seen any pop up. I've seen some discussion in the chat. We're always happy to have people discussing things. I think you can raise your hands also, so please. But we can also keep moving. Because we're going to talk a little bit more about what parents can do. So here's the next poll. what does literacy look like in your home? Do you go to a library or bookstore or online library now or online bookstore now every week or every month? Do you listen to audiobooks at home? Are your bookshelves just full of books and you can almost always find one you haven't read or haven't read in a while? And are you intentionally exposing your kids to literacy? All right. Well, we're mostly asking these questions so you think about them. Anyone else want to answer? Thank you. So we're going to start with language and how important language is.
Right, so piggybacking off of what we just looked at and taking a look at this very popular children's book, it really is about communication and language. And how do we share literature, right? How do we have this discussion about these sentences or the theme or the illustration? That happens at home, it happens as we're walking in our environment, it happens even as we're listening, right? So when we're listening to people, especially if we have the radio on, those sentences that are part of a song, right? They count as language. So we want to be able to connect all of our areas, our environment, to how we're looking at language and literature.
So true, especially in New York City, we have so much more opportunity to read as we're riding in the subways. We can talk as we're pushing the strollers, and not everyone in every city where you have to drive has that opportunity. I think we're really lucky in New York City to have all these extra opportunities for language. Now, and what is literacy? Literacy is, being able to read a menu. I don't know if anyone's ever gone out to dinner with someone and they said, what do you think I'd like on this menu? And the menu is not in Spanish or it's not in French. And you realize, oh, they're just not even able to read the menu and read, all these things. I'm working with a reentry program, helping older people learn how to read. And one of the youth in it actually got promoted at work because after he learned how to read, and he could be a server and waiter and write down the orders. So he was really excited that he got out of the kitchen, out of dishwashing, and got promoted because he could read and write. We know job applications are going to require you to read and write, even if they're online. You have to be able to read or write. Our ballots, they're written at 15th grade level for all our voter initiatives. Takes serious reading. But I have a friend who tells the story of never having learned to read. She's a lawyer now, but she listens to everything. She has great listening skills, I think 500 words a minute. But she once went to the grocery store and bought garlic salt instead of garlic. And the recipe that she made for her boyfriend also called for salt. And so the recipe turned out twice as salty as it should have been. She was very disappointed. And one of my favorite children's books, it's called The Little Old Man Who Could Not Read. And he was very disappointed when he poured the buttermilk on his morning cereal because he couldn't read. So reading, literacy is just important for everything, for shopping, for going out to dinner, for riding the subway and getting off at the right stop. It's important. But it's also important for another reason.
Yeah, so this is I think I said this before, but I really mean it for this part, right? So this is the real sweet stuff right here, right? What literacy, what literature, what books give us as human beings, as citizens of this world. We get to be better people because we read stories. We read stories that introduced us to characters that were dealing with resistance, that were dealing with courage, right? So we know that this world exists, and each one of these authors that you see, and it doesn't matter, and I'm going to say this very carefully, it doesn't matter if you are Black, if you're white, if you are rich, or you are poor, you are tall, or you are short. It doesn't matter. There are universal themes that affect all of us. We all care about family. We all care about love. We all care about friendship. We all care about money. That's what books allow us to experience on that level. So when we're reading at the end of a book, we understand how to be in this world a little bit better. And that was the intent for all of these authors. And so as readers, we get to enjoy that. We get to walk in this world, be better citizens, be good to ourselves, and be good to others. And that is simply because we read a book, or a big part of who we are in this world. And joy and experience and sharing comes because we are readers. Books give us that. So when we're talking about how important it is to read, we know that it's important for ourselves, for our collective selves, as we are with ourselves. The intimacy of what a book gives you is a very, very powerful thing. So just wanted to say that about that.
Thank you. So we want everyone to be able to read. And and I looked at this slide, I just realized I have a typo in it. So I'll have to fix that. But you know, for a long time, dyslexia was a stigma for my kid. He was bullied. He just couldn't read. He couldn't do the assignments. He hated going to school on Thursdays when there were reading buddies and he was supposed to read to the first graders. It really felt like stigma to him. But once his IEP proved to be power, and his neuropsych evaluation that he got saying he was dyslexic turned into power, and it got him into the Windward School for Dyslexic Kids, his life changed. He still uses it as power. In high school, he goes to Bard High School Early College, a selective high school here in New York City. He gets extra time on his tests. He got a language exemption, and it wasn't because I didn't think he could learn language, but because his cognitive resources are used up so early in the day. He gets to do homework during the day in his SETS study hall. He gets to do a lot of his homework during SETS. That way he gets to do his after school sports and still come home, and he can do a little bit of homework, but he's still usually pretty shot by 8 o'clock at night, and he couldn't be staying up till midnight doing his homework. This kid is, you know, he's more than a student. He's a ski instructor in the winter. He uses direct instruction to teach little kids how to ski. He's a bike mechanic, and he's a cyclist. He races bikes. He does long distance bike rides. You know, he's a pretty interesting kid now. Next to him is Amir Baraka. Now, he didn't learn to read as easily as his brother and sister, kind of like what Sean said, his story. And his mom didn't understand it either. His mom and his grandmother loved him, but they didn't understand why he couldn't read. He ended up not being able to do his homework or his schoolwork, and he dropped out of middle school. And, you know, he saw his life as a drug dealer. He was selling drugs and eventually ended up in prison. And a GED instructor in prison thought he might be dyslexic. He got evaluated when he got out of prison, and he went to a dyslexia reading tutor and learned how to read. Now he's an actor. He has to read scripts. He's an author. He's working on his second book. It should be out now pretty soon. It's called The Ugly Side of Dyslexia. And he's an activist. And this picture is at Dyslexia Awareness Day, where he and my son were both activists. So, you know, the village can really help us take that stigma away from learning disabilities and dyslexia and turn it into power. One way, and I want to turn it back over to Jackie now to talk about what else the village can do.
Hi, everyone. That is a lot. Oh, great. Are you able to pull up the slides for me?
Yep, so this first slide is a petition that you can sign, and I'll put it in the chat as well. And here is a resolution. Jackie, can you take us through this?
Sure, sure. So the whereas is, we all know, we've heard it from our parent and our young people here that spoke today. We know what is in existence right now. So we'll jump right to the resolutions. And here are some of the resolutions that we're asking everyone to sign on and help us fight for. The New York City Department of Education used taxpayer funds to advance literacy curriculum or pedagogy directly aligned with the science of reading. And also that DOE should place strong literacy in AIS offices in every district, including D79, to inform Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 instruction, creating a path to literacy for all students K through 12. Now, let me just explain a little bit. AIS is Academic Intervention Services. Every school gets funding for academic intervention services. Little do most parents know, or most of the community know, that every child who scores below a 1 or below a 3, or score 1 and 2 on standardized testing, are eligible to receive academic intervention services, where can even lead to private tutoring. And if AIS is implemented the way that it should be, especially RTI, response to intervention services, when it is implemented the way it should be, it will be able to catch learning disabilities early enough where it can be addressed and accommodated, where every child can learn to read, as shared at the beginning. Also, the DOE should educate and inform parents on what I just said, on school leadership teams, district leadership teams, PTAs, teachers, principals, and DOE administrators on the science of reading and its impact on student achievement. The citywide leadership team can model these duties and provide guidance for alignment and cohesiveness among education stakeholders on the science of reading. The CLT, which is the citywide leadership team, should devise a plan as mandated by the New York State Commissioner's Regulations 100.11 and provide guidance to school communities necessary for AIS offices in every district to implement quality tiered instruction. We need the DOE to partner with us in order to carry this out. Anyone who does not truly understand the power of the leadership team will question, what is all of this? So once you understand the power of the leadership team, your school leadership team, your district leadership team, and the citywide leadership team, once you truly understand what that is, the significance of it, we will no longer have to have or chase our tails and have these issues that we are constantly complaining about, because the DOE will be able to model what is supposed to happen, the effectiveness of what's supposed to happen. So I'll run through the rest of these as well and open it up for any questions. The DOE, we want all DOE schools to create a plan to align their literacy curriculum horizontally across grades and vertically through their school with the science of reading. All teachers, but especially special educators, kindergarten, first and second grade teachers, should be empowered to receive an in-depth and comprehensive digest of the science of reading, support and professional development to phase in the curriculum and pedagogy of structured literacy support by the science of reading and writing. And we have all of these great things to implement, but how are we going to get it done? So this is so important. Pre-K and 3K teachers should be able to teach the building blocks of literacy, including but not limited to the 44 sounds of the English language. DOE SETSS directory, and I don't remember what the acronym stand for, so I'll look it up real quick as you all ask questions. Directory be updated to include specialties and literacy specialists. Must provide certification of knowledge of evidence-based approaches to teaching literacy skills. Curriculum for education majors and graduate students in education in private, public, for-profit, non-for-profit, and online colleges and universities in all routes to teacher certification shall prepare pre-service teachers in the science of reading. That way, all of us will know how to teach through the science of reading. The literacy work in New York City should be a model for districts and teaching colleges throughout the country, ensuring every child can read, creating a better quality of life for all American citizens. Are there any questions?
All right. So
Okay. So,
number
I'm
7.
sorry. Yeah.
Number 7 is the SETS directory.
Special Education Teacher Support Services.
The SETS database doesn't let principals or parents choose a provider by their specialty. You have no idea who you're getting and what skills they have. It's only, their names and their location. And it's pretty crazy. So I definitely would need some improvement there. People are welcome to add their logo to this resolution. And we hope you will. And we're still happy to answer questions. I'm happy to go through the signs and symbols of dyslexia if anyone's interested. I imagine Sean will take some more questions. Dolores is happy to.
Yes.
I'm going to put up our email addresses.
And I want to thank Debbie Mize so much for never giving up, for pressing forward and making sure that we all know about this information and it's being implemented in our schools. So when we know better, we do better. Thank you so much, Dolores Connors, for sticking in that fight and keeping it going. And definitely to Dr. Sinai, as I know her, Dr. Sinai, and her definitely brilliant son, Sean. And I'm sorry, the baby's name. It's with me. Your brother's name, Sean. You're on
His
mute.
name is Dylan.
Dylan, right? Dylan,
Dylan.
exactly.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for your testimony and forging ahead and making sure that you pay it forward, that others in your situation will be able to know that they can also succeed and thrive as well. And thank you very much, Assembly Member Joanne Simon, for joining us and staying here with us. We really appreciate everyone for joining us. Sean, you wanted to add something?
No, somebody asked a question. What are the common indicators of dyslexia for high school students?
Yep, I'm going to put up a slide, but go ahead and talk for a minute.
I personally feel like an indicator that I actually observed with a person. I was on a college tour, and she came to the back and she started reading a book. And when she was reading a book, I tried to look at what she was reading, and it was like, and I also was looking at her like facial movements, like how fast she was reading through the pages, and if she was actually retaining information, because the book she was reading at the time I read before. But I feel like comprehension for a high school student is the most common indicator. If you're dyslexic, having comprehension, I feel like if you haven't gotten it, like you've been taught it from a young age, that's going to be the common indicator of being dyslexic. If they can comprehend what they're reading, or if they can read for a long period of time and comprehend everything they read over that period of time. I feel like that is a huge indicator if you're dyslexic or not.
Right, and especially that disconnect between listening comprehension and reading comprehension.
Yes.
Like when you're talking to them and when they're listening to something, they might take in tons more information than when they read. And
Yes.
even if they've been remediated, that still is true. So this chart that I just put up has some common things for young children. You might get mispronunciations later than you think you would. Things like aminal or paschetti and things like that. The language overwhelm, just overwhelm of language. So when you're young, it's like hard to retrieve the right word. I remember my son one time said, you know, that ocean over there by California, because he couldn't come up with Pacific. He could describe it, but Pacific wasn't coming to him. Following those multi-step directions, even learning how to tie your shoe, those multi-step directions and things. And sometimes like phys ed teachers will give instructions way too fast and not repeat them enough for all kids to keep up with. Trouble with rhymes, like just not able to guess in that rhyme. Just they're not there. They don't hear those rhymes. Guessing letters and words rather than decoding them. And trouble with separating and blending sounds and words because they don't have all their sounds. When you get a little older, you have trouble sounding out words because you weren't taught. Incredibly inconsistent spelling. A lot of repetition needed to learn. Like most kids might learn things after 4 or 5 repetitions. A dyslexic kid takes 30 or 40 sometimes. Avoiding reading out loud at all costs. Reading avoidance in general. Anything to do but not pick up that book. The language overwhelm might change in not understanding jokes, not understanding sarcasm or idioms or metaphors. And that listening comprehension versus reading comprehension, sometimes way apart. And even if you've been remediated in high school, you might need extra time still. You might be a slow reader still. Again, that listening comprehension that Sean talked about, the inconsistent spelling, the jokes, again, the sarcasm, but those cognitive resources, because high school gets so much more intense and just running out of resources before the end of the day.
Yeah. And we all learn differently, and I appreciate what you're saying, Sean and Debbie. I always admire your tenacity and sticking this through and having everyone understand this. We all learn differently. So it's very important for educators to really understand who they're working with so they can pick up on these signs. I see the assembly member has her hand up. Before I hand it over to her, because I'm going to ask her to say what she has to say and close us out, I want everyone to join National Action Network on June 30th. Educate to Delete Hate. I'll put the link in the chat, and keep in touch with us, follow up, because we will be working with the DOE and the community and making sure everyone learns how to read. Again, thank you so much, Debbie Meyer. The floor is yours, Assemblywoman Simon.
Thank you so much. You know, I wanted to respond to the issue of, what are sort of symptoms that you might see in a high school student. And one thing that I have found a lot with—
Your sound is a little goggly. Do you know why it's goggly like that?
It was better before. Right, how's that? Is it any better?
And we'll be able to deal with it.
I'll be brief. And that is that especially boys would rather be bad than rather you think that they were goofing off and that they don't care. And that's stupid. And I think girls tend to receive in the background a little bit more, but I think especially for boys, it becomes very different socially for many of them. And I think that's another sign as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We're going to stop recording. If I can figure out how.